Hello dear students and welcome to this special lecture on science and humanities. In this lecture, in fact, we will make an attempt to connect the missing links between science and humanities. And the outline of the talk or this lecture so far is concerned, we will begin with why should we do science. Second, we will talk about how small observations may lead to a great scientific discovery or discoveries and innovations. That means how small science can have huge impacts. And last but not least, we will be trying to see how science and humanities are linked. Where are the planes and through which ways they are linked and how. So for the first and fundamental question is concerned, why do science or why should we do science? A basic instinct of humans is to explore the unexplored and know the unknown. Science, in fact, is the secret behind the progress and power. If you visualize the contemporary world, the difference between the developed and the underdeveloped or non-developed basically stems from the progress in science that they have achieved and others have not. And then the third important point is most of the religious scriptures have also urged man to ponder over the wonders of Almighty. And if we deeply analyze the holy book Al-Quran, there are at numerous places very much emphasis on that. Don't you really travel on the planet Earth to ponder over the wonders of Almighty? So, in this perspective, when we really look exactly at what science is, let me tell you, all knowledge in fact springs from the sense of wonder that human nature is endowed with. And it is this deep, inexplicable urge to know that drives the whole epistemic endeavor, which alone sets humans apart from rest of the species. So, in simpler words, we can say that our attempt to understand, explain and predict the world we live in is what we call as science. Let me also tell you or ask you, does science consist of the awe-inspiring NASA experiments, the startling chemical reactions, the wonderful biological revelations alone, or it is something broader in scope? A very fundamental and important question for all of us to ponder over. Let me, dear students, give you first of all a brief idea of how science, when I say science, my main emphasis is mainly on biological science, how simple but innovative thinking has created big scientists. If you see from the times of Plato, 427 to 347 BC earlier, Plato believed that the world is a mirage, that the only things that we see and really exist are immutable forms or ideas, and that object or objects in the real world are just evanescent shadows of these forms. This was his fundamental understanding. In fact, in the book 7 of the Republic, Plato explains this fundamental concept using different allegories of a cave with prisoners watching shadows on a wall, producing some shining images of the real objectives. And in fact, Plato's idea can be summarized in the form of what we call as essentialism. Essentialism, based on Plato's concept of forms, dominated the Western thought for over more than 2000 years and impeded the progress in biology. There was an ideal form of each animal and plant. Different individuals in fact varied a very little from the ideal form because they were imperfect copies. But the ideal form was divine, deathless, intelligible, uniform, indissoluble, and always the same as itself. That's what Plato in fact believed. And if you look from this perspective, then the concept is somewhat antithetical to the concept of evolution. It just does not allow you to think beyond that. But after Plato, Aristotle came 384 to 322 BC earlier, and he in fact believed in reality and developed a natural philosophy that included many of today's sciences, particularly physics and biology. Aristotle visualized nature as a leader, in his terms, scala naturae, with earth at the bottom, then plants, then animals and humans, and so on. And from the biological perspective, one of the most influential naturalists or scientists was Charles Darwin, who, as you must be knowing, in his Origin of Species, published in 1859, proposed how one species gives rise to another species through a process of evolution. And one of the tenets of his theory of evolution was also that where food is limited, competition means that only the fittest would survive. This would lead to what we call in his terms as natural selection of the best adapted individuals and eventually the evolution of new species. In fact, these tenets came to Darwin through his widely traveling experience, as you must have heard about his Beagle expedition. And what Darwin said about evolution was again confirmed by a man who was in fact a monk in a church, Gregory John Mendel, who basically laid the foundations of genetics, and he traveled basically from monastery to science. What basically I want to emphasize here is that by making very small and simple observations keenly and innovatively, one can really come out with some fantastic ideas which are everlasting in their impression. What Mendel in fact did was, from 1856 to 63, as I said, he was a monk. He cultivated more than 29,000 pea plants to investigate how evolution that Darwin talked about really worked. And that's, in other words, how characteristics were passed down from one generation to the other was his fundamental idea to analyze or assess. And Mendel figured out that, or he figured out the basic principles of genetics. He was the first person who showed that offsprings received characteristics from both parents, but only the dominant characteristic traits are expressed. And Mendel's work only came to light in 1900s, long after he was no more. So, not basically a scientist, but just his urge to understand how things happen in nature, how characteristics are inherited in nature, he turned out to be so great a scientist that after having made so much of progress in science, we always refer to Mendelian genetics. And if you really trace from Darwin's time through Mendel's observations of pea plants on heredity, it was the duo of Watson and Crick who discovered DNA, what we popularly sometimes also call as the leader of the biotechnology revolution. You know, Watson and Crick in fact gave the double helix structure of the DNA somewhere in 1953. And this discovery showed how genetic information is transferred from one cell to another almost without any error. And let me emphasize over here that it was this discovery which in fact provided a molecular basis for what Mendel or Darwin had said about evolution. Dear students, you must not forget that even before Charles Darwin, there were some really amazing naturalists whose simple and small observations turned out to be a good impact science later on. And out of them, the most important figures, if I would name just a few, would be say John Ray, who was from 1627 to 1705. Carl Lineus, a very big man, 1707 to 1778 was his period. There was another naturalist, French naturalist, Comte de Buffon, from 1707 to 1788. Then there was one more Darwin, junior Darwin you can say, Erasmus Darwin he is called as, from 1731 to 1802. And Lamarck, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, from 1744 to 1829. I mean, these were some of the scientists whose observations contributed significantly to our understanding of the natural world. Just to make a very brief mention, if you look back at John Ray's contribution, he was the English naturalist who is really the father of English natural history, and he published lots of his preliminary works on plants, animals and natural theology. In fact, he taught for some time at Trinity College in Cambridge as well. John Ray came out with a number of influential books, and one of the books that I would like to draw your attention to was entitled The Wisdom of God Manifested in the Works of Creation. It was written in 1691. It was a very popular book espousing what came to be known as natural theology. It is the basic reference book of natural theology, a very classic book of course. And as I said earlier, Carl Linnaeus, in fact a Swedish biologist, he consolidated he is very rightly considered as the father of modern taxonomy. And why so? Most of his life in fact as a student and of course later on as a professor was spent at the Uppsala University, Sweden, wherein he invented the binomial nomenclature for organisms, which we right now also exactly follow the way he gave it. Say for example, you must be knowing in the binomial nomenclature system, every species has to necessarily have a generic name and a specific epithet. Say for example, Homo sapiens is the scientific name of the human species. Likewise, Oryza sativa. Oryza is the generic name and sativa is the specific epithet of the rice plant. Linnaeus has a remarkable contribution, and in 1743 he created the modern Celsius temperature scale as well. It is a very important point to note that he has this much contribution as well, besides doing the plant sciences or animal sciences in general, life sciences I mean to say. He created a taxonomy which consists of three kingdoms: animals, and in his terms vegetables. He meant by vegetables the plants, and then the minerals. It was his classification of at that point of time. And then of course, as you might be knowing, that this classification system progressed a lot and it was significantly improved by the later workers especially right now we have a phylogenetic classification system through molecular bases as well in vogue. This binomial nomenclature that Lineus used had been developed in the 16th, of course, or somewhere in the early 17th century, and it was later on systematically developed by other scientists who made a mention of more than 6,000 plants that were described on the basis of this nomenclature. Not only this, I also made a mention of Buffon, Comte de Buffon, a French mathematician, and at the same time he was a very good biologist and a cosmologist also, and a naturalist. And he also authored some incredible volumes on the natural history, which in French is sometimes called as Histoire Naturelle. Likewise, as I said, Erasmus Darwin, a junior Darwin, who obtained his medical degree again from the Cambridge College, he became a physician, but emphasized later on the power of the mind and paid a close attention to mental as well as physical conditioning. I mean, what is regarded by many as illness as having mental origin. I mean, it was his, on mind biology, he was the first pioneer to work upon. Then, of course, Lamarck is one more very influential man. In fact, he was the 11th child of his parents, who served for a long time in military, and as a soldier for several years after he worked until he was injured. He later on took to study medicine and made some important contributions to the cell theory, botany, invertebrate zoology, and evolutionary biology. In evolutionary theory, his contribution is very important. Let me tell you that if you visualize or if you analyze these people, they were not what you can say some born scientists, but by keenly observing nature and the natural processes, they obtained such insights which later on turned out to be a very good science. Dear students, let me caution you here. If you look back to the history of science, there are many others who have had a great contribution, especially the Muslims. There are some really great Muslim pioneers and peers in science. Just to name a few, if you remember, the father of algebra has been a Muslim, Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, or you might be knowing better, Ibn Sina, who is also called as Avicenna. He is the father of early modern medicine and clinical pharmacology. Likewise, Abir ibn Hayyan, commonly called as Geber, is considered as the father of chemistry. There was also a very good Muslim scientist earlier on, Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Qathir. He was involved in the measurement of the diameter of the earth for the first time, together with a team of scientists under the patronage of again a Muslim person from Baghdad. And if you look at this, the unfortunate part of this is, although Muslims have a great history in science, a glorious past indeed, but the present situation in science so far as concerned is really not so good. It's a bleak picture, and to my understanding the future is even uncertain. Because before the 14th century, when the Europe was called as the Dark Continent, Muslim scientists were ruling in all over the world, different spheres of science. So while not forgetting the past and being proud of them, of course, let's introspect what happened later on, and let's also ponder as to how can we now regain the scientific supremacy. My dear students, you must also think around. If you look around you, there could be some people who were as ordinary citizens or as ordinary students as you think yourselves, but they have turned out to be great scientists. From the Kashmir perspective, if you see, there are a number of people who, with a pretty ordinary background, have turned out to be world-class scientists. Even if you see around out of your friend circle, many are there who are publishing really in journals like Nature, Science, and many other impressive publications as well. So, and let me share here with you my own experience as a plant scientist. Just at this age, I could really see so many kinds of recognitions and publications which I never would have thought about. My point is, always try to do something extraordinary using ordinary circumstances, and that's what basically talent is. Dear students, one thing that I would like to emphasize over here: we can't do good science until we create such working conditions, both within and without, that learning automatically happens. One thing that is very important: we need to somehow cross the line of control, what we call as syllabus. Socrates never framed a syllabus, yet he gave Plato to the world. Though, course outline is a must, but it must not constitute the boundary of the thought. Now let's come to the another aspect. That's what I was talking about, how science basically, the biological science has progressed from simple observations to right now. If you see, the present age is called as the age of biology or biotechnology. So many revolutions, so many path-breaking innovations and discoveries have been made in biological science and are always being made, that this biology, when one would never have expected earlier on that we would know our own blueprint, what is the secret of our lives, we know through the genetic blueprint. But the another aspect is this science and humanities linked somewhere through other disciplines like literature and so on? Unfortunately, in our context, quite often scientists completely divorce humanities, and sometimes vice versa is also true. And the polarization between science and humanities that characterizes the modern education system is partly due to increasing specialized nature of science, and also partly due to the influences of scientism, the belief that science, especially natural science, is the most valuable part of the human learning because it is the most authoritative or serious or beneficial kind of a subject. But if you think a little broadly, is it really sensible of us to subscribe to this dichotomy? Probably not. If you really go ahead, the history of science testifies to the fact that all great scientists from Aristotle to Einstein have been good philosophers and social thinkers as well, with a taste for literature and of course a ear of music as well. Students, you must always keep in mind that science invents and discovers, philosophy questions, analyzes and clarifies the foundations of science. Society imitates and emulates the happenings. Literature critically observes and mirrors. Music refreshes and revitalizes, meaning thereby that all these things at a very good plan are intricately linked. Of these things, which part of the organic whole can be said to be more important and which is less important? It is something or a question that only fools would be loving to comment upon. They all support and strengthen one another. The philosophy, science, humanities, literature, they all support and strengthen one another and help us broaden our knowledge and deepen our understanding of the whole world that we live in. So what is needed? We need a framework that enables one to recognize the considerable value of science alongside the considerable value of many other parts of learning. While doing science, we need to have, or at least strive to have, the love of wisdom of Socrates, the objectivity of Shakespeare, the piercing intellect of Nietzsche, the stern command of Napoleon, forbearance and patience of Jacob, the affection of a mother, the humility of a student, and the faith of a mystic. You must be thinking sometimes that is it really idealism or utopian? But Isaiah Berlin says that utopias have their own value. Nothing so wonderfully expands the imaginative horizons of human potentialities. So, dear students, let me conclude this lecture with this fact that science and humanities are both linked, and we need to somehow discover these missing links, and that is the only way that we will be able to really enjoy doing science and serving its best possible benefits to the prosperity of humanity. So with that, I take your leave now until I meet you next. Goodbye.